My name is Loretta. I am 68 years old, and my occupation is a retired public school administrator. I spent my entire life pouring every ounce of my strength into raising my only son, Andre, believing that a mother's sacrifice would be rewarded with love and respect in her golden years. But when my phone buzzed with an alert that my life savings had vanished into thin air, I learned a brutal lesson. The people you break your back for are sometimes the very ones holding the knife to it. And the arrogant smirk on my daughter-in-law's face was about to trigger a war she had absolutely no idea she was starting. I was sitting in the living room of the brownstone that had been in my family for 3 generations. The morning sun usually brought me peace, but today the loud chime of my phone shattered the quiet. It was a security notification from my bank. I opened the application, adjusting my reading glasses, fully expecting to see my usual monthly pension deposit. Instead, the screen showed my joint retirement account balance at exactly $0.00. My heart completely stopped. Decades of early mornings, late nights, and skipped meals had been wiped out in the blink of an eye. Before I could even catch my breath to process the shock, the heavy thud of footsteps came down the oak staircase. It was Savannah, my son's wife. She walked into the living room with a chilling, triumphant smirk plastered across her face. She did not ask if I was all right. She did not offer any explanation. Instead, she casually tossed a stack of glossy pamphlets onto the coffee table right in front of me. I glanced down. They were brochures for the cheapest, most run-down, state-funded nursing homes in the county. "Do not look at me with those wide eyes," Loretta Savannah said, her voice dripping with venom and unearned superiority. "Your money is completely gone. You are officially broke, and quite frankly, we do not have the time or the patience to take care of a useless old woman anymore. You need to pack whatever clothes you can fit into a single suitcase. Tomorrow morning, my brother Bryce is coming over to clear out this entire house." The betrayal stung deep in my soul. But it was not Savannah's cruelty that broke my heart. It was the man standing just a few steps behind her. Andre, the boy I had worked 3 jobs for so he could go to medical school and become a doctor. He stood there staring down at the hardwood floor, refusing to meet my gaze. Not a single word of defense left his mouth. He was going to let this woman throw his own mother out onto the street. They thought I was just a helpless, senile black woman who would quietly accept her fate. They thought they had backed me into a corner. But they had made one fatal miscalculation. My husband passed away when Andre was just 7 years old. A sudden heart attack took the love of my life and left me to navigate this harsh world as a single black mother raising a young boy in the city. I made a promise to my husband at his grave that our son would never become a statistic. He was going to be a doctor. I was working as a public school administrator during the day, but that salary alone was not going to pay for pre-medical programs and expensive medical school tuition. So I took on extra work. I cleaned the very hospital floors my son now walks on. I spent my weekends baking peach cobblers and sweet potato pies to sell at church functions and local farmers markets. I graded papers until 2 in the morning, and then woke up at 5 to start all over again. I worked 3 jobs for over 15 years. I wore shoes with worn-out soles and mended my own winter coats so Andre could have pristine textbooks and a proper laptop. I poured my blood, my sweat, and my tears into his future. Every time my back ached or my hands cramped, I pictured him in that white doctor coat, and the physical pain just washed away. I gladly gave up my youth and my dreams so he could live his. When Andre finally walked across that graduation stage to accept his medical degree, it was the proudest day of my entire life. I thought the hard part was over. I thought we had crossed the finish line together. But then Savannah walked into our lives. Savannah was a white woman from a wealthy suburb who always carried herself like everyone else in the room was breathing her air. From the very moment Andre brought her to my brownstone for Sunday dinner, I could feel the chill radiating from her. She looked at my antique furniture and my family photos with a tight, forced smile that never quite reached her eyes. But Andre was completely blinded by love. He thought she was perfect, and as a mother who just wanted to see her son happy, I swallowed my doubts and welcomed her with open arms. Shortly after they got married, Andre came to me with a grand vision. He and Savannah wanted to open their own private medical clinic. They needed a massive amount of capital to get the business off the ground. He looked at me with those same hopeful eyes he had as a little boy asking for a new bicycle. How could I say no to the son I had sacrificed everything for? I wanted his practice to succeed more than anything in the world. So I made the biggest mistake of my life. I sold off the vast majority of my retirement stocks. The safety net I had painstakingly built for my golden years was liquidated to fund their dream. And because my heart was full of absolute blind trust, I went down to my bank and added Andre as a joint owner to my primary savings account. I told myself it was for emergencies. I told myself that if anything ever happened to me, my son, a successful doctor, would manage my affairs with love and integrity. I handed him the keys to my financial survival because I believed he would always protect me. But gratitude was not a word in Savannah's vocabulary. Once the clinic opened and the money started rolling in, she and her brother Bryce showed their true colours. Bryce was a slick, fast-talking real estate broker who always wore suits that were too tight and cologne that was entirely too strong. Every time he came over to my house, his eyes darted around the rooms, sizing up my crown moulding and original hardwood floors. He would casually make remarks about property values in my neighbourhood and how much a historic brownstone like mine could fetch on the current market. He looked at my home not as a place of warm memories, but as a pile of cash waiting to be claimed. Together, Savannah and Bryce made it their relentless mission to make me feel small in my own space. The disrespect started subtly but quickly escalated into blatant cruelty. They would come over for holiday dinners, and Savannah would openly turn her nose up at my cooking. I would spend 2 days preparing my famous collard greens, baked macaroni and cheese, and cornbread stuffing, using recipes passed down from my grandmother. Savannah would push the food around her plate, and loud enough for everyone to hear. Tell Bryce that she simply could not stomach such heavy, unhealthy ethnic food. She called my heritage unrefined. She mocked the way I decorated my home, calling it outdated and tacky. They looked at me with pure disdain as if I were a servant who had overstayed her welcome. The most agonizing part was watching Andre change. At first, he would gently ask Savannah to be polite, but soon he stopped defending me altogether. He adopted their arrogant posture. He started agreeing with Savannah when she criticized my lifestyle. Slowly but surely, Savannah drove a bitter wedge between my son and me. The weekly phone calls turned into monthly text messages. The Sunday dinners stopped completely. They isolated Andre from me, building a wall of elitism and entitlement that I could not cross. I was no longer the mother who broke her back to put him through medical school. I was just an embarrassing reminder of his humble beginnings. I was a dark shadow they wanted to erase from their shiny, new, perfect life. I sat in my beautiful brownstone alone, for weeks at a time, wondering where I went wrong. I had given them everything, including my financial security, and in return, they treated me like a burden they could not wait to bury. They thought they had successfully pushed me to the margins of my own life. They thought I was just a naive old woman who would quietly fade away and let them take whatever they pleased. But they forgot one crucial thing about a mother who knows how to survive. When Savannah tossed those cheap nursing home brochures onto my coffee table and my own son refused to look me in the eye, I did not scream. I did not fall to my knees and weep. In my younger days, I might have unleashed the righteous fury of a mother scorned, but at 68 years old, life had taught me that a loud reaction is exactly what your enemies expect. They wanted me to be hysterical. They wanted me to break down so they could point their fingers and call me unstable. Instead, I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble just enough for them to see. I picked up one of those flimsy brochures with a defeated sigh and whispered that I would go upstairs to start packing my things. Savannah smiled a wicked, satisfied smile and pranced out of the room like she had just won the lottery. Andre finally looked up, but I turned my back to him before he could utter a single pathetic apology. I walked up the grand oak staircase of my family brownstone, holding on to the mahogany banister that my grandfather had carved with his own 2 hands. I went into my bedroom and closed the door. I pulled a few cardboard boxes from the closet and started tossing old sweaters into them, making just enough noise to convince them that I had surrendered. But inside my mind was sharp and cold. My heart had stopped bleeding and began to pump ice water through my veins. I waited until midnight. I sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the house settling. When I was certain Savannah and Andre were fast asleep, I crept quietly down the hall and into the small study my late husband used to use. I locked the door behind me and pulled back the heavy Persian rug. Underneath the floorboards was a hidden safe. My husband had always been a man who prepared for the worst. He used to tell me that the world was unkind to black women, and he wanted to make absolutely sure I had a fortress of protection around me if he ever passed away. I inputted the combination and pulled out his heavy leather-bound ledgers and thick stacks of documents. I sat at his desk under the dim glow of a reading lamp and began to read through the financial structures he had established decades ago. They thought they had drained me dry. They thought that joint savings account was my only lifeline. But looking at the papers my husband had left me, I realized just how foolish and short-sighted my daughter-in-law truly was. I did not shed a single tear that night. I simply gathered my strength and prepared to uncover the rest of their filthy little plan. The following afternoon, the house was quiet. Andre was working a double shift at the hospital, and I was supposed to be upstairs, packing the last of my belongings. I was organizing a stack of vintage photographs when I heard the front door click open, followed by the sharp, rhythmic clicking of Savannah's designer heels against the hardwood floor. She was not alone. I heard the deep, booming voice of her brother Bryce echoing through the hallway. I quietly stepped out of my bedroom and crept to the edge of the second-floor landing, staying completely hidden in the shadows. I pulled my smartphone from my pocket, opened the voice memo application, and hit the red record button. I held my breath and listened to the devastating conversation unfolding in the living room right below me. Bryce let out a loud, arrogant laugh and congratulated his sister. He told her she was a genius for pulling it off. Savannah poured herself a glass of my expensive red wine and proudly boasted about how incredibly easy it had been. She said Andre was so whipped and so terrified of losing her that he just handed over the access to the joint account without asking a single question. Then the conversation turned to the money. My money. The life savings I had sacrificed my youth to build. I listened in pure horror as Bryce admitted that he had been heavily involved in illegal sports betting and owed over $100,000 to some very dangerous men. Savannah had not drained my account to invest in their medical clinic or secure their future. She had stolen my money to pay off her sleazy brother's gambling debts so his kneecaps would not get shattered. They had used my blood and sweat to wipe his slate clean. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, but I kept my hand steady, holding the phone perfectly still. What they discussed next was so profoundly evil, it made the theft of my money seem like a minor offense. Bryce asked Savannah if she was worried I might go to the police or hire a lawyer to dispute the missing funds. Savannah let out a chilling laugh that echoed off the high ceilings. She told Bryce there was absolutely nothing to worry about, because they were already taking care of my credibility. She explained that she had reached out to a corrupt doctor friend of hers from medical school. For a cut of the stolen money, this doctor had agreed to falsify my medical records. Savannah was actively fabricating a comprehensive medical history, claiming that I was showing severe signs of advanced Alzheimer's disease. She told Bryce that they were documenting fake incidents, saying I was leaving the stove on wandering the streets at night and acting aggressively toward them. They were building a paper trail to prove to a judge that I was completely out of my mind and incapable of managing my own affairs. Savannah said that once the fake medical evaluation was officially filed, no court in the state would ever believe a word I said. Any accusation I made about the stolen money would simply be dismissed as the paranoid delusions of a senile old woman. Senile. I stood there on the landing, feeling a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My own family was not just robbing me. They were actively plotting to strip away my sanity, my agency, and my basic human rights. They wanted to erase my voice entirely. I checked my phone screen to ensure the red timer was still ticking. Every single word of their sinister conspiracy was being captured perfectly. Bryce chuckled and praised her again, saying the plan was bulletproof. Savannah confidently stated that the state-run facility she had chosen for me was notoriously underfunded and overcrowded. She deliberately picked a place where I would be heavily medicated, ignored, and forgotten. She wanted me locked away in a tiny room, staring at a blank wall until the day I died. I pressed my back against the wall, praying my knees would not buckle under the sheer weight of their cruelty. I had welcomed this woman into my family. I had cooked for her. I had treated her like a daughter. And in return, she was engineering my complete and total destruction just to bail out her degenerate brother. Savannah continued to describe the nursing home in sickening detail. She told Bryce that the facility smelled of bleach and despair, and that the staff turnover was so high nobody would ever notice if a resident complained about being held against their will. She laughed as she mimicked the way she planned to act in front of the judge, putting on a fake crying voice, pretending to be the exhausted, heartbroken daughter-in-law who was simply trying to do what was best for her poor, sick mother-in-law. Bryce joined in the laughter, telling her she deserved an Academy Award for her performance. He asked how soon they could get me out of the house. Savannah replied that the paperwork would be finalized by the end of the week. She said she had already packed my bags and placed them in the basement because she could not stand the sight of me wandering around the house anymore. I squeezed my eyes shut. The sheer malice in her voice was suffocating. She was talking about me as if I were a piece of rotten garbage that needed to be hauled to the dump. I realized then that there is a special kind of evil in this world, an evil that smiles at you over Sunday dinner while secretly digging your grave in the backyard. I made sure to capture every second of their vile laughter on my phone. This recording was my shield and my sword. I carefully pressed the stop button and saved the audio file, emailing a copy to myself and a backup copy to a secure cloud server. I was not going to let a single technological glitch ruin my chance at justice. Later that evening, while Savannah was taking a bath and Andre was still at the clinic, I slipped into their bedroom. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were steady. I needed physical proof to match the audio. I found Savannah's designer leather tote bag resting on an armchair. I unzipped the side pocket and found exactly what I was looking for. There was a thick manila folder, folded in half. I took it out and quickly snapped photos of every single page with my phone. The documents inside were horrifying. There were drafted legal petitions for emergency guardianship and printed emails between Savannah and her corrupt doctor friend discussing the forged Alzheimer's diagnosis. There was also a bank receipt showing the massive wire transfer of my life savings directly into a sketchy offshore account linked to Bryce's gambling debts. The paper trail was undeniable. I carefully placed the folder back exactly how I found it and slipped out of the room undetected. I now had everything I needed to destroy them. But the final piece of the puzzle, the ultimate terrifying truth behind their grand scheme, was revealed during the last part of Savannah and Bryce's conversation that I had recorded. Draining my savings to pay off the gambling debts was just the appetizer. The main course was my home. My gorgeous, historic, multi-million-dollar brownstone. Bryce explained that paying off his debts only brought his balance to zero, but he wanted to come out of this situation wealthy. He told Savannah that the real estate market in my neighborhood was skyrocketing and developers were paying absolute top dollar for authentic brownstones. Their ultimate plan was to use the emergency guardianship to legally seize control of my entire estate. Once I was locked away in that miserable state-run facility and declared mentally incompetent, Savannah would have the legal authority to put my home on the market. Bryce was going to act as the selling agent, pocketing a massive commission, while Savannah and Andre walked away with millions of dollars from the sale. They were going to sell the house my grandfather built, the house where I took my first steps, the house where I rocked my son to sleep every single night. And what about Andre? That was the question that haunted me the most. I had spent hours wondering if my son was a victim of Savannah's manipulation or a willing participant. The audio recording gave me the agonizing answer. Bryce had asked Savannah if Andre was going to be a problem when it came time to sell the family home. Savannah just scoffed. She said Andre knew exactly what the plan was from the very beginning. She told Bryce that Andre was a spineless coward who cared more about keeping up appearances and keeping her happy than he cared about his own mother. He knew they stole the money. He knew about the fake Alzheimer diagnosis. He knew I was going to be thrown into a miserable institution to rot, and he had simply turned his head and allowed it to happen because he wanted a share of the millions they would get from selling my legacy. Hearing that truth was like taking a physical bullet to the chest. The son I had sacrificed my entire existence for was complicit in my destruction. I had scrubbed hospital floors until my hands bled so he could wear a stethoscope, and he was repaying me by signing my death warrant. All the love I had for him evaporated in that exact moment. He was no longer my son. He was just a greedy, cowardly stranger wearing the face of the boy I used to love. The pain of that realization was suffocating, but it did not break me. It transformed me. They thought they were dealing with a fragile old woman who would quietly disappear into the night. They were dead wrong. I wiped the last tear I would ever shed for my son from my cheek. I had the audio recording. I had the photographs of their forged documents. And most importantly, I had the secret power my late husband had left me. I was not going to a nursing home. I was going to war. They thought they had me entirely figured out. To Savannah and her sleazy brother Bryce, I was nothing more than an exhausted, uneducated, and defenseless old black woman who had outlived her usefulness. They looked at my calloused hands, my modest clothing, and my quiet demeanor, and they saw an easy target. They assumed that because they had drained that one joint savings account, they had successfully severed my only lifeline. They were so blinded by their own arrogance and their deep-seated prejudice that they failed to realize one absolute truth. My late husband was a man who possessed a quiet, terrifying brilliance. When my husband was still alive, he understood exactly how the world worked. He knew that a black family building generational wealth would always be a target, not just from strangers, but sometimes from the very people they let into their homes. Before he passed away, he sat me down in his study, held my hands, and made me promise to keep our true financial reality a closely guarded secret. That night, looking at the documents I had pulled from his hidden safe, I finally understood the magnitude of his foresight. The money Savannah and Andre had stolen to pay off Bryce was just a drop in the ocean. It was a decoy account. The true wealth of our family was locked away in an irrevocable trust, a bulletproof legal fortress that my husband had meticulously established decades ago. And the most beautiful part of this entire revelation was the name listed as the sole uncontested trustee, with absolute control over every single asset. Loretta. Me. As I sat in the dim light of the study, running my fingers over the crisp parchment of the trust documents, a profound sense of power washed over me. Savannah and Bryce were practically salivating over the prospect of selling this historic brownstone. What they did not know was that this multi-million-dollar property did not belong to me as an individual, and it certainly did not belong to Andre. It belonged to the trust. They could not sell a single brick of this house without my explicit legal authorization. But my husband's brilliance did not stop there. I flipped to the next page of the portfolio and had to cover my mouth to stifle a victorious laugh. The commercial real estate building downtown. The exact same sleek, modern glass front building where Andre and Savannah had just opened their shiny new private medical clinic was also owned entirely by the trust. They thought they were renting their premium office space from an anonymous corporate management group. They had no idea that the rent they paid every month was quietly funneling straight into my secure holding accounts. I owned the roof over their heads, and I owned the very ground their business stood on. They were plotting to strip me of my dignity, throw me into a miserable state-run facility, and steal my home completely unaware that I held the keys to their entire existence. I gathered the documents, placed them into a secure leather binder, and locked the safe. I did not shed another tear. The sorrow was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating determination. The very next morning, I waited for the house to empty out. Andre left early for his rounds at the hospital, and Savannah practically sprinted out the door to go to an expensive Pilates class, undoubtedly paid for with the money she had stolen from my savings account. As soon as her luxury SUV turned the corner, I grabbed my coat, tucked the leather binder under my arm, and walked 3 blocks down to catch a taxi. I was not about to leave a digital footprint by using a ride-sharing application tied to my phone. I needed absolute stealth. I gave the driver an address in the most prestigious financial district in the city. 20 minutes later, I was walking through the towering glass doors of a premium law firm. I was there to see Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling was a sharp, formidable, and exceptionally brilliant African-American attorney who had been my late husband's closest friend and legal advisor for over 30 years. When I walked into his immaculate corner office overlooking the city skyline, he took one look at my face and immediately instructed his secretary to hold all his calls for the rest of the day. I sat down in the heavy leather chair across from his mahogany desk, and I laid everything out. I showed him the photographs I had taken of Savannah's forged medical documents. I showed him the emails discussing the fake Alzheimer diagnosis. I handed over the bank receipts, proving that Savannah had wired my life savings into an offshore account to cover Bryce's illegal gambling debts. And finally, I played the audio recording of their cruel, sickening conversation from the hallway. Mr. Sterling listened to the recording in absolute silence. His face, usually a mask of calm professionalism, hardened into a look of righteous fury. He interlaced his fingers, resting them on his desk, and looked me squarely in the eye. He told me that what they were attempting was not just a profound moral failure, but a series of severe federal and state crimes: elder abuse, conspiracy to commit medical fraud, wire fraud, and grand larceny. He assured me that we were not just going to stop them. We were going to completely dismantle their lives, legally, financially, and professionally. We immediately sprang into action. Mr. Sterling activated his top forensic accounting team. Within hours, they had silently traced the exact routing numbers Bryce had used for his illegal gambling debts, securing undeniable proof of the stolen funds. Next, we moved to protect the trust. Mr. Sterling drew up immediate legal injunctions, completely freezing all trust assets, so that no one, not even with a forged power of attorney, could attempt to place a lien or execute a sale on the brownstone or the clinic building. We built a legal iron wall around my empire. Before I left his office, Mr. Sterling handed me a burner phone and a small, discreet digital recording device to keep in my pocket. He told me to go back home, to smile, to play their game, and to let them dig their own graves just a little bit deeper. I walked out of that building feeling like a titan. When I returned to the brownstone, I immediately slipped back into the character they had created for me. I became the frail, confused, easily intimidated woman they desperately wanted me to be. The tension in the house was escalating rapidly because Savannah was getting impatient. She knew she needed my signature on the medical power of attorney papers before she could finalize her grand plan to have me institutionalized. That very evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. She slammed a stack of legal documents onto the granite countertop next to my teacup. She shoved a pen toward me, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet, patronizing tone. She told me that these were just some routine insurance forms that Andre needed me to sign for my future medical care. She leaned in close, her expensive perfume making my stomach turn, and whispered that if I did not sign them right away, my medical coverage would lapse. I looked down at the papers. I could clearly read the bold print, stating it was an absolute surrender of my medical and financial rights. I picked up the pen and let my hand shake violently. I intentionally dropped the pen onto the floor, apologizing profusely in a weak, trembling voice. I told her my eyes were so blurry from my medication that I could not read the big words, begging her to just give me a little more time until my vision cleared up. Savannah snatched the pen off the floor with an irritated huff. She rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck in her head. She muttered under her breath about how dealing with me was like dealing with a stubborn toddler, warning me that I had exactly 2 days to sign the papers, or she would have Andre force my hand. I simply nodded, looking down at my hands, hiding the triumphant smile spreading across my lips. Every day I delayed was another day Mr. Sterling used to tighten the legal noose around her neck. The absolute peak of her audacity came on a Saturday afternoon. Believing that her victory was imminent and that my removal from the house was a guaranteed certainty, Savannah invited a group of her superficial, wealthy friends over for an extravagant brunch. She spared no expense catering gourmet food and pouring expensive champagne, celebrating a triumph she had not yet earned. I was instructed to stay out of sight, banished to the shadows of my own home, while they laughed and drank in my formal dining room. I quietly walked down the hallway to get a glass of water from the kitchen, stopping just behind the slightly ajar dining room door. The clinking of crystal glasses echoed through the hall. I pressed the record button on the device Mr. Sterling had given me. One of Savannah's friends asked her what they were going to do with this massive, beautiful house once the old woman was finally out of the picture. Savannah laughed a sharp, cruel sound that bounced off the walls I had painted with my own hands. She proudly boasted to her friends that the house was going on the market by the end of the month. She told them they were going to make an absolute fortune completely renovating their lifestyles. Another friend asked if she felt even slightly guilty about sending me away to a state facility. Savannah scoffed loudly. She told her friends that she did not feel an ounce of guilt. She boldly proclaimed that I was nothing more than a ragged, useless piece of trash waiting to be tossed out. She said that I was a stubborn stain on their perfect lives, and once I was locked behind the doors of that facility, she would finally be able to breathe clean air. Her friends erupted into terrible, mocking laughter, toasting to her upcoming wealth and my impending misery. I stood perfectly still in the shadows of the hallway. I did not flinch. I did not cry. I just listened to the sound of them celebrating my demise, clutching the recording device in my pocket. They were drinking champagne in a house I owned, celebrating a fortune they would never touch, and plotting the downfall of a woman who held their entire future in the palm of her hand. Savannah thought I was a rag waiting to be tossed out. She had no idea that the garbage truck was already on its way, and she was the one sitting squarely in the dumpster. The climax of their wicked little scheme arrived on a crisp Saturday morning. Savannah had the absolute audacity to host a celebratory brunch right in my formal dining room. She invited a handful of her superficial friends, and of course her sleazy brother Bryce to toast to their impending wealth. I could hear the obnoxious popping of expensive champagne corks from the kitchen. They were drinking my wine from my crystal glasses, celebrating my forced removal from the very home I had scrubbed and polished for decades. The smell of expensive catered food filled the air, a sickening contrast to the vile betrayal happening under my own roof. I walked into the dining room, standing tall with my shoulders pulled back and my chin held high. The laughter in the room immediately died down, as if a ghost had just walked in. Savannah glared at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. She marched over to the hallway closet, dragged out a battered old suitcase, and threw it violently at my feet. The heavy thud echoed across the hardwood floor, making the crystal glasses vibrate on the table. She crossed her arms and tilted her head, barking at me that my time was officially up. She announced to her silent audience of friends that the medical transport van was arriving in exactly 1 hour to haul me off to the state facility. Bryce chuckled, swirling his champagne, boasting loudly that the real estate photographer was scheduled for noon and they needed the property completely empty before he arrived. I looked at Andre, my own flesh and blood, the boy I had given my youth to raise. He was standing near the fireplace, staring at his expensive shoes, refusing to intervene, or even look his mother in the eye. He was fully prepared to watch his mother be dragged out like unwanted trash. Savannah stepped closer, pointing her manicured finger an inch from my face. She told me to pack whatever rags I could fit into that suitcase and get out of her sight immediately. She said I was nothing but a burden, and that this beautiful brownstone was finally going to serve a real purpose for people who actually deserved it. I did not flinch. I did not shed a single tear. I simply looked at her with a calm, steady gaze and told her that she was celebrating a victory she had not earned. Savannah threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh, calling me a delusional old woman. She turned to her friends and joked that my brain was clearly already gone. But her wicked laughter was abruptly cut short. 3 heavy, deliberate knocks pounded against the thick oak wood of my front door. Before Savannah could even ask who it was, the door swung wide open. Mr. Sterling stepped into the foyer looking like a storm, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit. Flanking him on either side were 2 uniformed city police officers, their silver badges catching the morning light. The entire dining room froze in absolute terror. The smug grins melted off the faces of Savannah's friends in an instant. Bryce slowly lowered his champagne glass, his face suddenly draining of all its colour until he looked pale as a ghost. Mr. Sterling walked straight past the trembling guests, straight to the dining room table, and slammed a thick stack of legal binders right on top of Savannah's fancy brunch spread. The loud crack made everyone jump out of their skin. With a voice that commanded absolute authority, Mr. Sterling announced that he was my legal counsel. He looked directly at Savannah and informed her that she was standing in a property owned entirely by an irrevocable trust. He explained in crystal clear terms that I was the sole uncontested trustee of this estate. He stated with chilling precision that neither Savannah nor Andre had any legal standing whatsoever to sell, appraise, or even occupy the brownstone. Savannah stammered, her face turning a blotchy, angry red, aggressively insisting that I was medically incompetent and that they had the official paperwork to prove it. That is when Mr. Sterling pulled out the second stack of papers. He looked dead at Bryce and revealed that his firm had tracked every single stolen dollar wired to the offshore gambling accounts. He exposed the fake medical documents they had forged with their corrupt doctor friend, explaining that federal investigators were already building a massive case against them. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Then Mr. Sterling turned his sharp, calculating gaze toward Andre, who was now trembling uncontrollably. My brilliant attorney handed my son a sealed white envelope. He informed Andre and Savannah that the commercial building housing their shiny new medical clinic was also a primary asset of my trust. because they had engaged in criminal financial fraud against the trust. They were in direct violation of their commercial lease agreement. Mr. Sterling declared that they were officially being served with an immediate eviction notice from their medical practice. They had exactly 48 hours to vacate the clinic before the locks were changed, and all their expensive medical equipment was seized to pay back the stolen funds. The devastating reality of the situation crashed down on them like a ton of bricks. They were not getting millions from my house. They were losing their lucrative business, their income, and their entire future in one swift blow. The two police officers stepped forward, their heavy boots thudding against the floorboards as they moved with absolute purpose. They walked straight past my cowardly son and grabbed Bryce by the arms, twisting them behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the room, sealing his fate. They arrested him on the spot for wire fraud, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit medical fraud. Bryce was stammering and begging profusely, swearing he would pay the money back. But the officers dragged him out the front door without a single moment of hesitation. Savannah completely collapsed, falling to her knees right beside the old suitcase she had maliciously thrown at me. Her wealthy friends quietly grabbed their coats and practically ran out of the house, wanting absolutely nothing to do with a criminal investigation, leaving her sobbing hysterically on the floor. She realized in an instant that her life of luxury and entitlement was completely over. Andre finally found his voice. He rushed over to me, dropping to his knees with heavy tears streaming down his face. He grabbed my hands, pleading and begging for my forgiveness, swearing that he loved me and that he was just confused by the pressure. I pulled my hands out of his desperate grasp. I looked down at the man I had sacrificed my entire life to build, feeling absolutely nothing but cold finality. I stared straight into his weeping eyes and delivered my final word. A mother can give her child everything, but she will never allow him to strip away her dignity. Today, I sit in the quiet warmth of my beautiful brownstone. The morning sun shines through the large bay windows just like it used to, before that terrible storm hit my life. Savannah and Bryce are currently facing years in federal prison for their crimes, and Andre is working double shifts at a rundown public clinic, desperately trying to pay off the massive mountain of debt he accumulated when I cut him off completely. I sip my sweet tea and look at the sturdy walls my grandfather built, feeling a profound and unshakable sense of peace. I want every single older woman listening to my voice right now to hear this message loud and clear. Family love is a beautiful and sacred thing, but you must never, under any circumstances, hand over the keys to your life and your hard-earned assets to anyone. You can give your children the absolute world, but you must always keep a secret safety net tucked away just for yourself. A mother should gladly give her heart, but she should never ever give away her power or her dignity. What do you all think about the ultimate fate of those incredibly ungrateful people, my darlings? If you were standing in my shoes, would you ever be able to forgive that cowardly son of mine? I would absolutely love to hear your honest thoughts, so please leave a comment below, letting me know exactly what state you are watching this video from and what time it is right now. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so I can have the motivation to share many more real-life stories with all of you. Goodbye for now, and God bless you all, my darlings.